Welcome back, students. Today we're going to be going over module number 3, if statements and while loops. Today we're going to be introducing you guys to the if statement with the else and else if clauses included in there. We're also going to be introducing you to while loops and why loops are such a fundamental portion of any programming language. Once you learn loops, whether that be the while loop or the for loop, your understanding of how code can be usable in the business world will skyrocket. So without further ado, let's jump into the workbook as always, and let's get started. Alrighty guys, if statements and while loops, part of our loops and conditionals module. Let's jump into the PowerPoint for today and let's do it. Alrighty guys, so today we're going to be learning about the if statement. A little mistake there, not statements. There's only one if statement, but you can have multiple if statements, so maybe I did that on purpose. We'll be going over while loops, guys, and this might sound kind of out there and black magic-y, but don't worry. While loops, for loops, list comprehensions, they are easy, and we're going to break it down piece by piece to help you guys understand how they work. Next, we're going to be going into how these work in individual components and how these can be used in problem-solving skills. And as always, I always have a meme on the beginning of my PowerPoints. I broke my phone. This guy is sad. I wonder what, oh, nope, he's still inside the loop. So you'll understand this once we get into while loops, and that will be a funny thing for you to look at. So let's jump into, as always, I'm using Windows. I will be doing exercises inside of Jupyter Notebook, but feel free to use whatever IDE you decide you want to use. Email me at matthew.nguye2023@fau.edu. No N in win here, no mistake. And let's do it. So let's get into the basics of the if statement. So the if statement is a conditional statement that tests a condition. So if you've ever used something like Excel before, you've probably used the if function that's built into Excel. Very similar inside of Python. If the condition is true, the code block under the if statement is going to be executed. And if the condition is false, the code block will be skipped. So how do you write an if statement? An if statement can be written by just saying if, comparing a variable, comparing numbers, comparing a list, a dictionary, all of the data types that we learn in Python you can utilize inside and checking in terms of the if statement. There are two keywords that we can add into our if statement. That is the else if keyword / elif. So we use the syntax elif and the else keyword. So we'll get into those and how they work. Alrighty, so let's take a look at this example here. So we have income as a variable. So income is $75,000. The if statement is going to check if the income is greater than $150,000 in line number 3. So it's saying if income is greater than $150,000, in this case it is not, then it'll print you have a very comfortable living. So if this number was $200,000, it would print you have a very comfortable living. Now we have an else if. So this else if or elif, it is going to check if the income is greater than $80,000. In this case, it is not. So it will not print this statement, but if it was between $80,000 and $150,000, then it will print you have a comfortable living. And then if the elif statement in the next line, if the income is greater than $50,000, which in this case it is, so ding, 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 bingo, this is going to print out that you have a reasonably comfortable living. And then lastly, if this income was less than $50,000 in this case, then it would print you may need to budget carefully for a comfortable living. So basically, if none of these conditions are met, then the else clause will print or run whatever code you want to run in order for you to utilize that clause to give you an output if this number is not equal to any of these conditionals. Alrighty, let's jump into the workbook and take a look at the if statement. As always, I'm going to be jumping into Jupyter Notebook, so let's do it. Alrighty guys, so we are in the Jupyter Notebook now. Let's take a look at some of the if statements in this case. So as we had in the practice exercise, we have the income variable, which is equal to $75,000. Let's run the notebook and we have a comfortable living. Now the reason why this first statement didn't happen is because we have the greater than operator here. If we were to put greater than or equal to, we click run. Then now we see how this has now changed to the first if statement and it has met that condition. So we printed that specific condition in this case. If we were to lower this to, let's say, 500, in that case, your income is pretty low, but we'll run it. And as you can see, it goes through the first if statement. It did not meet that condition. It goes through the second if statement, did not reach that condition. It goes through the third if statement / if else statement, didn't reach that condition. So it goes to default to the else statement. In this else clause, we get print, you may need to budget carefully for a comfortable living. So let's take a look at this block of code. So basically what this does, it compares if a number is even or odd. So in this case, we have a number here, and the if statement says if num, which is the variable number, modulus 2, so remember from our operators lesson, we see that this parenthesis sign doesn't mean percent, it actually means modulus. So basically what we're doing is if the 7 divided by 2 has a modulus of 0, remember the two equal signs means that we're comparing if the num modulus 2 is equal to 0. If we had one equal sign here, let's run this and see what happens. We're going to get an error because we're assigning a value here in this if statement, but we want to compare. So in this case, we have number 7. So we know that 2 divided by 7, we have the answer would be 3 with the modulus of 1. Remember back in 3rd grade math, we have remainder. So this if statement, basically what it's saying is it's saying if the number divided by 2 has a modulus of 0, then that number is even. So in this case, if we were to change this number to 8, it's the same thing. We're checking if the number has a modulus of 0. In this case, we know that 2 divides into 8. And if you guys can remember back to simple math, any number that can be divided by 2 is an even number. So in this case, we're going to get even. So let's run this. If we run this code, we say 8 is even. Let's change this back to 7. Let's click run. So change it back to 7. Now let's run this, and we get that 7 is odd. So there is one specific case that we might want to check for. So let's say we have the number as infinity. Let's say someone put in the number infinity in this case. So what we can do is we can change this to an elif statement. We can go down here and we can write if num is equal to infinity, because we know infinity is not even or odd. We'll close this statement out. Then we'll do print input a real number. Infinity is not a number. Now, obviously, we'd have some validation for the type of numbers that we can put into our code, but in this case, I just wanted to show you how you can change certain conditions to reach the outcome that you need. In this case, let's actually just make this an integer too, in case that it is put in as a string. So let's run this. Input a real number. Infinity is not a number. Let's put in 8. Let's run this. 8 is even. Let's put in 7. 7 is odd. Alrighty, so that's just an example of how you can do that within Python. Let's cancel all this out, and let's hop into an exercise that I want to run with you guys. Alrighty, guys, let's get into making a grade calculator using an if statement inside of Python. So how would we approach this? Let's add an extra cell down there and let's get into it. So take a second, pause the video if you want to try this on your own. If not, we'll run through it together, and it'll be very easy and very rewarding knowing that we can make a grade calculator. So let's write grade as the variable, and that's going to be equal to the input of enter your grade. Let's make this a float in case they want to enter like 95.5 or however that might be. So let's check to make sure this is good. Let's run this. Enter my grade, 95, 96.5. Cool, that works. Alrighty. Let's add a colon here to make it a little bit cleaner. Let's restart and clear the output. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to do if the grade is greater than or equal to 90, then we know that we got an A. You got an A. So let's copy this statement and let's paste it down a couple times. Okay, so now we're going to change this if to elif. So we know that if the grade is greater than or equal to 80, then they got a B. We know that elif the grade is greater than or equal to 70, Then they got a C. Now we know if the grade is greater than or equal to 60, then they got a D. Sad face. Oops. Let's do double quotes. Alrighty. And if the grade, and then from here, let's change this to L if. Oops. I have something is going funky on my keyboard. So L if grade is greater than or equal to 60. Boom. And let's do an else clause and say else grade else. Let's do else clause else print you failed. All right, now let's run this now. So click run. Let's take out these quotes. We didn't need this. Add an extra quote there. Let's run this now. Let's do 60. We got a D. Oh man, let's run this again. So let's run the code. Let's say we got 100. We got an A. So as you guys can see, that's a simple way to make a grade calculator. You'll run into some syntax errors. Like for example, if I have this print statement here, it's going to give me an indentation error. You make sure you always indent your if statements in else and elif clauses. If I forget a colon there, it's going to give me a syntax error. It's going to expect that I have this this colon here. So just make sure you have those, and you make sure you're able to properly have the syntax in line with Python's documents. Make sure you always have your syntax correct, and in Jupyter Notebook you'll be able to tell if your syntax is off or not because it'll give you the error. So in this case, I'm going to restart and clear the output, and we'll get into while loops, guys. So let's jump back into the PowerPoint presentation and go over while loops. Alrighty guys, so let's take a look at while loops. But first, let's go over what a loop actually is. It might sound crazy to you. It's not a roller coaster, but you can think of it as a roller coaster in terms of going around and around and around, maybe like a merry-go-round, until the operator stops the actual ride from going on. That's a pretty good analogy. All right, so let's take a look at loops. Loops in Python and any programming language for that matter are structures that allow you to repeat certain actions or process multiple times a specific code block. The two main types of loops are for loops, which iterates over a sequence like lists or strings, and while loops, which continues executing the loop as long as a certain condition remains true. Loops are going to be the introduction to really taking in all the information we've learned over the past couple of days and really applying it to some applications that might suit you for a real life business case or building an application. So let's take a look at both the loops. So a for loop, you initialize the loop condition is going to be run. If it's false, it's going to exit the loop. Now, if it's true, the loop body will continue. It will update the loop, whether that be by incrementing a specific index or adding to a variable that will go back into the loop to check that again. Now, the while loop is a little different because the while loop just goes on for a specific period of time. So a while loop is going to test a condition and it's going to run the loop body as long as that condition is true. Now, the difference between a for loop and a while loop is that typically a for loop, we know how long the loop will run for, and the while loop, we don't know. It's based on the condition that is given, and in this case, we're going to be going over while loops today, but let's get into some of the topics of loops and things to consider when writing your own loops. Infinite loops, which just means your loop is going to continue running forever, caused by not having the condition in the specific variable or list or dictionary that you're looking for. One-off errors that always happens in pretty much any coding language, and loops specifically. So if you're writing the index as a specific number, let's say you're starting the index at 1 instead of 0, and you have a loop that's going to be utilizing that index to be a counter, you could be off by 1 position in that case. So remember to always make sure that you have your indexes in check, and remember to do your error checking when thinking about those things. Make sure you indent. Python is a language that relies on indentation. So like in the if statement, if you have your indentations off, it's going to throw you an error. Remember that you want to make sure that you're doing loops over things like lists, sets, or dictionaries, or even tuples. You want to make sure that you're able to actually loop over a specific type of data. You can also loop over strings too. So keep that in mind. You can't loop over something like a number or an integer or a float. Next is going to be nested loops. Nested loops are kind of complicated, and in this class we might go over some of the basics of nested loops. And this is basically a loop within a loop. So it's a little bit past the scope of this class, but you're going to want to make sure that you learn nested loops for the future. And as I said, we'll probably go over a simple case for a nested loop in the for loop video. And then you have the break and continue statements, which basically just determine the flow of your loop. So you might be sitting here like, what is this guy talking about? I don't even know what he's saying. I promise you, we're going to get into the workbook and we're going to go over while loops. And then in the next lesson, we're going to go over for loops, and you'll be able to really understand how these things work. Okay, so a while loop is used to iterate over a block of code as long as the condition is true. The condition is checked on each time the loop is being run. So as you'll see in the block of code, we're going to be checking for a specific condition. And once that condition becomes false, then the loop terminates. So the syntax is very simple. It's just while whatever condition you have and then the code block, and that will be pretty much it. So again, when you enter the while loop, it's going to test the condition. If it's true, it will go to the while loop body. So maybe that's printing a specific statement, or maybe it's doing some type of computation. But right when you run that condition and that condition is false, your loop will end. So the basics of a while loop, we're going to be looking at this example. So we're going to have I is equal to 1, and it's saying while I is less than 10, we're going to print I. So in this case, we're setting the variable I equal to 1. So we're saying while I is less than 10, this begins the loop, and we're going to be running this print statement as long as I is equal to less than or equal to 10. So in this case, at the end of this while loop, this is the code block that we're running. So each time it runs through this specific while loop, we are adding 1 to I. So if you start at the beginning, I is now equal to 1 on the first run. Just follow my cursor here. So while on the first run, I is going to be equal to 1. So we're going to print I because that condition is true since it's less than or equal to 10. Now we're going to add 1. So when we go back to the beginning of the loop, I is now going to equal 2. And now 2 is less than or equal to 10. We're going to print 2. We're going to add 1 to I. So now I is equal to 3. We're going to run this condition again. We're going to print 3 all the way up until we get to number 10. So we're going to go number 10. I is equal to 10. Let's say we went through it 10 times. So now that I is equal to 10, that statement is still true. We're going to print I. We're going to add a 1. So now I is equal to 11. Oh, look, the condition is false. Now the loop ends. All right, guys, let's hop into the Jupyter Notebook and let's look at the actual code and go over it so you guys can understand kind of how this looks in practice. So let's take a look at this while loop. It's the same one from the exercise. So let's actually run this so you can see. So it's going to print 1 through 10. In this case, we're saying I is equal to 1. While I is less than 10, we're going to print I. So if we set this to 0 and run this, we're also going to have 0 to our loop. If we set I equal to negative 10, it's going to print out all the numbers from negative 10 to 10 since negative 10 is less than or equal to 10. Now let's say we start I at 11 and run this. There's not going to be anything because the condition is automatically false. If we start I at 9, let's say, it's going to print 9 and 10. So let's run this. It'll print 9 and 10. So basically what it's doing, the while loop, is it's checking whether that condition is true. It's running this code. It's running this code. And then it's going back to the beginning. So let's say we want to print I. And we also want to print is the number we are on. Let's close this out. Let's run this. So we're going to get, again, we're going to print that statement each time. And it's pretty simple. So if we know that we're able to compute specific conditions looping over a block of code, this can be very useful when looking at things that require us to look into a specific variable, a specific list, specific data that we're given. So as you guys know, I'm building the foundation for you guys to go on and learn more and more about Python. So that is the while loop. Let's move into another example. So in this case, we're running a name variable called name here, and we're saying that equal to nothing. So we're saying while name dot lower, which is just turning that into lowercase, is not equal to quit, then it's gonna ask us to enter our name. So enter our name. So Matthew. It's gonna keep asking us to enter our name. Nicholas. Well, right when we hit quit, the loop will stop. So we'll stop getting prompted to enter our name. So let's just add another print statement here so you guys can visualize this a little bit better. Let's print name in this case. So let's run this, enter our name, Matthew. It's going to print our name, Nick, Felix. But right when we hit quit, now it's going to print quit in this case, and that will be it. So the loop will finish there, and we can continue on with whatever other code we got. Alrighty guys, let's make a running total calculator in a while loop. So I'm going to show you guys how to do this, and we'll wrap up for today. So let's think about this, and maybe you want to pause the video to try this on your own. So let's say the running total starts at 0, obviously, and let's say the goal is going to be 100. So this is very, high level problems, but if you ever decide you want to get a programming job, you're going to have a lot of interview questions that seem like they have no application in the real world, but what they're doing is making you think. So, and if you checked out HackerRank already, you've already been exposed to some of those questions. So let's just do it. So in this case, they're saying to make a running total calculator. Running total starts at 0. The goal is 100. And let's say while loop until the running total is equal to the goal. Let's do less than or equal to the goal. Alrighty, so how will we start? Let's define the goal as the first variable here. Let's do goal is equal to 100. Let's do running total is starting at 0. So we're going to say while the running underscore total is less than or equal to the goal, then it's going to prompt us to input a variable, and we'll call it number in this case. Let's make it an integer to make sure that no one can mess anything up. So we're going to say input, enter a number, and there's a weird bracket here, so we're going to take that out. And now what we're going to be doing is every time we input a number, it's going to be adding to this running total variable. So we'll write running total is equal to either running total plus number, or as you guys know, we can just do running total plus equals number as a shorthand operator in that case. So let's run this. Let's do 20. It's going to make us do another one. We're at 40. Let's do 40. Now we're at 80. Let's do 10. Now we're at 90. Let's do 20. Now the loop will end because we were able to finish the condition in this case for the running total to be less than or equal to the goal. Alrighty guys, thank you for watching this video on while statements and the conditionals, the if statement in Python. I hope you guys learned a lot from this specific lesson. I will catch you guys on the next video in this module. We'll be going into for loops and list comprehensions. We're inching our way towards being able to say we confidently know Python. And I hope you guys enjoyed this series and these lectures. And I hope you guys gained a lot of knowledge from this specific video. Take care and have a great day.